Oh, welcome everybody to our panel today. Thank you for joining us virtually. Hopefully we'll be back to regularly scheduled programming next year, IRL, in real life. This is the Diversity and Inclusion Summit as part of Spark Animation Festival, brought to you for a second year on behalf of WIA, Women in Animation. Women in Animation is the only organization dedicated to advancing women in the field of animation. WIA envisions a world where women share equally in creation, production, and rewards of animation, and WIA provides the resources and connections to make it happen. The popularity of animation, and in fact, the general thirst for content, has grown not only in terms of worldwide reach, but in terms of diversity of audience, which includes age, gender, ethnicity, and culture. As this growth continues, so does the need to ensure that content represents the world as it should be to move culture forward. The WIA is hoping this Diversity and Inclusion Summit will continue to move things forward in leveling the playing field to enable more diverse voices and perspectives to be seen and heard. Our Diversity and Inclusion Summit is all about connection and community. Our panel today is about widening our lens, which is about bringing a focused discussion with members and active allies of the Black, Indigenous, and people of color, aka BIPOC, this community to talk about and share their experiences. My name is Aamer Haleem, and I've been known to play the part of a person of color on TV once in a while. Here to speak about their unique journeys in front of and behind the camera are our esteemed panelists. Brenda Crichlow, welcome to you. She's a classically trained actor, voiceover actor, and an experienced acting and dialect coach. Born and raised in Vancouver, Brenda has over 20 film credits to her name, including Home Invasion, Electra Woman and Dinah Girl, Elf, Flicka 2, and The Fantastic Four, to name a few. And when it comes to series television, she's also appeared in a range of shows, including Supergirl, iZombie on CW, along with a number of Hallmark productions. Brenda has also accumulated a wide range of voiceover animation credits and is perhaps best known for her work as Zakora on My Little Pony. Brenda created and managed the very successful Crichlow Actor Studio and worked alongside top talent as a dialect coach on projects such as A Series of Unfortunate Events. Welcome to you, Brenda. Nice to see you over there. How are you?
Good, thank you so much.
And let's also welcome our friend Darrell Dennis. As a Vancouver-born actor, writer, producer, and comedian, Darrell began his acting career at the age of 18, starring on CBC's hit teen series Northwood. Among his many achievements, Darrell directed every single episode of the variety series The Guilt-Free Zone on the Aboriginal People's Television Network, aka APTN, for 2 seasons, as well as being a head writer and a lead cast member. That's a lot to take on. Recently, Darrell's feature film, I should say, is an adaptation of Tales of an Urban Indian, received production funding from Telefilm, with Darrell as the film's director. Currently, Darrell is a writer on the CBC developed series Little Bird, which has partnered with Netflix and will air on APTN in 2022. He is also the showrunner and writer for the Super Channel funded series Hillary for Hire, and currently joins us from Los Angeles. Hello, Darrell.
Hey.
And Prem Gill is the Chief Executive Officer of Creative BC. This organization is designated by the province of British Columbia to focus on uniting, sustaining, and growing British Columbia's dynamic and diverse creative sector, including motion picture, music, and sound recording, interactive and digital media, and magazine and book publishing. Prem spent 8 years with TELUS, including in the role of Director of Production and Original Programming, as well as being on the core team that saw the successful development and launch of the Story Hive program and TELUS's Optic TV community channel. Prem is currently on the board of directors of the Bell Fund, a not-for-profit organization. The Bell Fund's mission is to support Canadian media content makers in creating for and connecting with audiences here and everywhere. Welcome to you, Prem.
Hi, Aamer. Nice to see you.
And that's all the time we have, people. No, we have a lot to talk about. We're going to sort of compartmentalize our discussion, beginning with where we were in terms of diversity and inclusion in the BIPOC community. And I guess the most benefit our attendees can have to hearing from our panelists is to talk about their experiences and sharing that. So Brenda, let's begin with you. Tell us about your origin story, as it were, and what it was like being a Black female artist when you were starting out.
Okay. Well, I am born and raised here in Vancouver. I'm of Caribbean descent, so I'm half Jamaican, half Trinidadian. And I started off in theater, so I went through Studio 58 Theater Arts, which is a wonderful training program. But coming into theater, we also had film and television that was just getting started here. Now, theater, for me, there were probably about 3 of us in our school at that time. So your first 3 terms, this is a good example for me to use because it kind of culminates in something at the end I'll get to. The first 3 terms are your technical terms, as it were. Your 4th, 5th, and 6th terms are your performance terms. Now, what I'm going to talk about is content, quality, and being a woman of color. So coming into theater school, I've auditioned, I've been accepted, and what is on the mandate for the rest of the term, once I've now passed and I'm coming into my performance terms, aren't shows that are necessarily reflective of who I am or my story. So when I'm auditioning, I'm not necessarily getting that lead role. I may get a sub role. And if you talk about equality, there's something there that was not equal. So I'm working just as hard. I'm taking all the same courses. I think I have a gift. I've been told that I'm talented in what I'm doing. I'm working, it's theater school. So you've got your successes, you've got your challenges. So one of the very first things that I ended up having to do was, and it was one of the hardest things, and if you want to go there, I will go there. I went to our artistic director, who was also my acting teacher at the time, and it was a humiliating experience on the one level. I had to get very brave to go in, sit down and say, how come I am not, when it's posted on the door, all the other colleagues who are friends of mine, and they're still friends of mine to this day, why are they in the lead for this show? Oh, and here we are in another term, this show, but I'm not. So my question is, why would you be choosing shows where I would have to play a lead or a sub part to support this kind of content, this kind of material that you've chosen as part of the season? So don't you know, after that conversation, which was difficult, I felt intimidated. The answer was just, okay, well, thank you. Take it under consideration. And don't you know, I did get a lead. I got 2 leads. But do you know what those leads were? And do you know when they were? They're not the main stage production. They were during Lunchbox Theater. So I got a lead playing in a show called Scanline, Moliere comedy. I played Celine. I also played Hattie in Laundry and Bourbon. Now, the beauty of that, it was not colorblind casting, but in a sense it was. Because if you look at the era, you look at the time when Moliere was written, you look at Hattie, I would never really play those roles in real life, perhaps. But I sure found out that I could do it. I found out that I was funny. And I was thrilled beyond measure to get that opportunity. But why was it that I had to go in and I had to put myself in that position to fight, to dream and to hope and to know that there's definitely a place for me and stand up for myself? Does that make sense? The amount of energy that I had to put, nobody else had to do that, but I had to do it. And I did get something out of it. So film and television, going now into that realm at the start, all the shows that were coming here at the very beginning, I go back a way. So again, it might make me sound like an antiquated piece of driftwood, but I'm truly passionate and very thrilled that I'm able to work in a business that I love. But film and television, when I first came here, we had the Jump Streets, the MacGyvers, the Look Who's Talking, we had big shows. And a lot of the roles that all of us that were coming out of theater school for, fully trained, ready to go, but who were ethnics, were playing some of the background performers or some of the hookers or the prostitutes. Because as a woman, I was seen, we're sexualized, so we're exotic, or we aren't Black enough, because some of the stories that are coming here are Black American stories. So we are Canadian. And don't you know, I'm Jamaican or I'm Trinidadian, so I've got that to go in the back. You know what I'm saying? So there is a weird conundrum. There's a weird place in time where all the roles that you're getting are some of the sub roles. You're not getting the opportunity. It is not presented to you.
Right.
That's where we were.
Yeah.
I will come back and talk about where we are, because I think that'll be the next thing. I don't want to.
That's exactly where we're going to head after we speak with Prem and Darrell and share their experiences. But what you reminded me of was, you know, when I first started working in front of a camera, I was asked questions about, shortening my name instead of Aamer Haleem. Can we just go with Aamer? I mean, that's tough enough to say. And I mean, imagine hearing that. Is it tough enough to say Aamer? Really? Okay. And it was funny to me that I remember going to the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. I was working for VH1 at the time and doing a show there. And the number of people that came up to me from all parts of the quote unquote flyover states, right? The places where they wouldn't know how to say Aamer, and how perfectly they said it to me. And you could tell by the accent, hey, Aamer, big fan of yours. Love watching your show on Sundays, or Saturdays. So, I know exactly where you're coming from. Darrell, when you were starting out, tell us about, the initial success that you enjoyed, but how do I put this, perceive yourself, and how were you perceived as just an actor who's doing well, who's talented and successful, or as someone who also has to represent the First Nations community as well?
Yeah, so I grew up in the interior of BC on this fairly isolated reserve, and I was bused into junior high, to go to school. And while I was there, I started getting involved in drama class. Initially, it was because I had a lot of energy and I was a bit of a class clown, so they figured that putting me in drama class would get it out of me, get it out of my system. But in fact, it did quite the opposite. So when my mother moved to Vancouver when I was like 16 or so, I obviously went with her. She went there for an accounting course. And while I was there, continued on with drama in high school. And I heard this open casting call for the show called Northwood. And I went in and, went through a few auditions, and I finally got it. And this was amazing for me because I never, ever perceived that I would ever be able, I loved drama, but I never thought that I would be able to make a living at it or actually go anywhere with it, because, growing up where I did, your choices, I was either going to be a logger or I was going to be a mechanic or, probably work in the rodeo circuit or something like that. So, that was all that I was expecting for my life. So when I started the show, I was very lucky in that my very first production, that it was not, the stereotypical sort of role. So I came into it not having to deal with that at first, but I quickly learned that outside of that show, it was going to get stereotypical really quick. So when I started the show, I had like short hair, and my agent at the time, this was just after, when I talk about aging myself, it was right after Dances with Wolves. So Indigenous actors were getting roles, but it was the same role, and you had to have the long hair, the high cheekbones, and it was, I always joke, it was the same script every time I was auditioning, but I'm not exaggerating. It was basically, a white man has brought dishonor to our village, and that sort of thing, and and eventually the white guy saves all the Indians and teaches them how to be real people. So I did a number of those. I grew my hair out to land a lot of those roles, and I couldn't stand it. I always felt dirty doing those roles. So I eventually, time went on, and I moved to New York, and I decided to make the big decision, and I cut my hair off and decided to be an actual actor, and started seeing. And it was difficult. It was a very hard choice for me, and I think for a lot of Indigenous actors, because I was getting rid of a whole role. And people always say, oh well, you can. The casting directors can see, or producers can see. They just put a wig on you. It's like, not really. No, that's not actually how it works at all. If you don't come to the audition with your long hair and your high cheekbones and your war paint on, then you're probably not going to get the role. So I did that. And lately, from that point on, I was playing, a lot of what they call ethnically ambiguous roles.
Right.
So that's kind of been where I'm at now. And that's kind of slightly my origin story. That's, I'll talk about when I was bit by a radioactive spider afterwards, but
well, you don't want to give away too many secrets, right?
Yeah. I will add, though, that a large part of where my career diverged was that because of my distaste for that sort of the stereotypical roles, I actually started writing and started creating my own projects. I started writing the shows that I would want to be in and that I would want to see, and that changed the direction of my career like immensely. And we can talk about where that's led from that.
Absolutely, and that's what I wanted to also talk to Brenda about too, is having the roles be defined for yourself by yourself. And back then, and we're talking about, just for people who are, in terms of the attendees who are listening to this, we're talking about it about 20 to 25 years ago. So we're still in the VCR, compact disc, DVD era. And the reason I point that out is because, you know, the barriers of entry, and that's what we'll talk about when we get to the where we are portion, have gone away as far as what we had to deal with back in the day in terms of what Brenda's already outlined, what Darrell's outlined in terms of going through not just casting directors and executives and all that stuff, but convincing them, hey, I'm as much a Canadian or American or wherever you happen to be auditioning to play the part as everyone else. Prem, let's talk about your background. And the one thing I think you and I share is that South Asian background. And the one thing I also wanted to add before you tell us your origin story, as it were, is that the struggle or the resistance you meet within your own community and culture, because patronizing the arts, when you look at Bollywood and the music industry, et cetera, and from the South Asian community, is there's no problem there. But, oh, I want my kid to be a lawyer, an engineer, a doctor, not one of those actors or people on TV.
Yeah, thank you, Aamer, and hi, Darrell and Brenda. Really interesting hearing your perspectives. And thanks everybody who's joining us for this conversation. I'm here in my office in Mount Pleasant in Vancouver, which sits on the unceded ancestral territories of the Coast Salish people, the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh. Yeah, lots of interesting things there. You know what I always say to parents now, Aamer, who are still skeptical of their children entering this field is, we need lawyers and accountants actually in this industry as well.
Yes, exactly.
Especially accountants. So anybody out there who's interested in being a production accountant, please, you know, look into that, because there's a big drought of those types of roles. But, you know, my origin story is slightly different. I'm not a performer. I have been on camera, but, you know, more in the talk show kind of world of local television many years ago. And I think we're all of a similar generation on this panel, where many of us started in the late 90s, early 2000s, and saw a lot of shifts and changes. And I was very much at that point involved in the local television landscape. And for me, you know, growing up in the Lower Mainland, I grew up in North Burnaby here, was, I loved, you know, 70s, 80s television, but obviously there was never people that looked like me or had similar origin stories as me on the screens, from, you know, scripted to unscripted television. And I wanted to work in broadcasting when I graduated from university. And again, going to mainstream broadcasters, I was very diligent and organized in my information interviews. And basically, I was told pretty much consistently by most broadcasters that, you know what, you should go to the multicultural channel, because that's where they really need people like you, or that's where you'll find yourself. And so I did. I was like, all right, well, if that's what it's going to take, I will. And I volunteered. I worked for Sushma Dutt, who just actually is a pioneer here in BC. If you don't know her, she was just received a Jack Webster Lifetime Achievement Award. And she gave many of us people at that time who were not getting opportunities in mainstream broadcasting, you know, at least a place to go and learn. And, you know, things developed from there. And I did end up working for a broadcaster that eventually became City TV here in Vancouver, and still exists. And I did have the opportunity there to help shape programming. And it was a bit of a, it was run by a company called Chum at the time. So there was a lot of leeway to experiment and try things and try to reach audiences. Their whole mandate was to reach audiences that didn't see themselves represented on television. And that was in, you know, like 2000 to 2006. Ownerships changed, a lot of things shifted. And then we kind of went into this space again, certainly in the broadcasting landscape, where there weren't those opportunities again. I was part of I was on air, I produced many other shows. I was also running funding programs that supported underrepresented voices. And then all that kind of went away, and then it had a bit of a revitalization. And the conversation now, obviously we know what has shifted and what's been happening. But really, you know, my motivation has always been and continues to be, and was from the beginning, of, you know, seeing myself and really supporting people who haven't been able to get into the systems to understand the support, or even understand entry points. And over the 20 plus years, it still continues, while it's in different forms. And, you know, the experiences that Darrell and Brenda shared, I still hear those stories from performers. And certainly, you know, Darrell, I think both of you, like, focusing on your own development of your own IP and as a way to see yourself and people like you on screen is definitely something that is where we start to see a shift in whether you see people. I'm probably getting ahead of myself, Aamer, so I'll stop.
No, it's okay. In fact,
because I'm just thinking when you see changes in leadership and whether it's the creative or the executive, you see change.
And I want to use what you just said, addressed to Brenda and Darrell as a jumping off point to talk about where we are today, because you said that some of those things that Brenda and Darrell outlined that they were dealing with back in the day are still present today. So why don't you expand on that if you could, and then Brenda and Darrell, please feel free to jump in as well.
Yeah, certainly around the stereotypes of the types of people who get casted into roles. I'm thinking particularly of performers, right? So it's still very much that the South Asian person is still the taxi driver,
right?
Or those are the kind of roles that they're getting called into, you know, from like the first Deadpool, where the South Asian character in one of the first scenes is a South Asian taxi driver whose name is kind of being mocked. That's not that long ago. And we really have to continue to examine and look at those things to, you know, who is, when they're casting, who are the main cast and what do they still look like? And I think we know, because we all watch everything.
Yeah, I mean, you know, Darrell, like as far as I can see that, you know, those roles that you were talking about, the ethnically diverse character that, you know, I generally go for commercial auditions, and that's the area that I get cast in, because it's one of those things where, and there was one time where you were playing a quote Indian father. It was for a car commercial. And at one point I remember the casting director said to me, could you do it in an accent? And I know where they were going, and I played dumb and I said, you mean like a Southern accent, or would you like me to do a British accent? Because I was born in London. So in terms of where we are, do you see and hear anecdotally stories like that?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Especially, well, for my community, there is, I mean, we have come a long ways. We now, I mean, you know, with APTN, and, you know, there's been a huge shift in moving past the idea of Native people as either like complete villains or what I like to call as sort of like brown wizards. I think a lot of the, you know, a lot of the roles, it's every time a Native person appears on screen, there's some sort of mystical flute music and the screech of a hawk that happens, and, you know, it's like dum 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 dum. Whereas, you know, a lot of what we're starting to go for now is we're starting to be seen as, you know, just regular cops and doctors. It's like we're the lowest as far as the amount of that representation goes. It usually always has to be something related to do with Indigenous. But yeah, for the most part, I mean, I'm still seeing it. Like I audition a lot in LA now, and I actually find that the roles I'm going for, ironically, in LA, I don't go for a lot of Indigenous roles in Los Angeles. I go for doctors and soldiers and lawyers and you know, detectives and stuff, which is part of that ethnically ambiguous. Whereas in Canada, I still find if I'm going for something in Canada, it is still very much Indigenous. I'm rarely ever called for something in Canada if it's not some sort of Indigenous flavor to it, which I find very strange, because I've played a wide variety of different characters. I've played, you know, a lot of different occupations that had nothing to do with that, but still I find myself still being, you know, okay, but okay, yes, we'd love to bring Darrell in, but there's no Native role for him. It's like,
right.
Okay, so yeah.
And by that you mean like, you know, if you're playing a character, a doctor, for example, it's not enough that maybe the doctor is ironically a hypochondriac. Maybe he, you know, smokes too much or drinks too much. It's also, oh, there has to be an Indigenous component to his character as well. Is that what you're referring to?
I find that, yeah, I find that. Like it usually has to be written in the breakdown Indigenous in order for me to even get called in for it, which I find incredibly strange. You know?
And Brenda, you touched upon that with your origin story in terms of actually not seeing people who look like you reflected back to you. Do you see that there's a difference there? And the second part to my question is, since you worked with and continue to work with a lot of productions that come up north, i.e. from the US, do you see and hear a different perspective from them, from those production crews and executives and producers and writers when you're working with them?
Okay, let me go back to your first question. So your first question is, what do I see in terms of, just clarify your question again?
Just people who look like you or me or whatnot, like who weren't on the screen when we were starting out reflected back at us?
Oh, yes. Right now, I think what you're seeing, it's almost like as if the Band-Aid has been ripped off. I almost feel like between producing teams and writers, there's a mad scramble right now to inject color, color line, but inject color into their production. So all of a sudden, the auditioning opportunities have increased. All of a sudden, people who voiced roles that were not people of color or whatnot, sometimes now they're being recast. And that's regardless of whether or not they were like a Robin Williams and did an amazing accent even better than what I could ever do. There's a mad swift to kind of go out there and clean house. Some of it is very well thought out. Some of it is not. Some of it is because we have that mandate, we need to just do this. And some of us, it's an eyeball roll. Some of us, it's like, thank you very much. I am absolutely thankful and grateful to have this opportunity. And look at that. I've never played that role before. In terms of what I see reflected, my background, as I said, Jamaican, Trinidadian, I'm married to a Frenchman. I have mixed children. So do I see that represented on camera? A lot better. Do you understand where I'm going with that?
I'm sorry, what was the last part? There was an audio issue.
Oh, was there? I see. So I'm married to a Frenchman.
Yes.
Blue-eyed. My children are mixed. Do I see that on camera? Better in terms of representation.
Yeah.
So where we are now is, like I said, a scramble to kind of atone for the past, and everybody has pasts. Everybody has a scar.
Yeah.
Everybody has, it's almost like there's a black fatigue. I'll speak for us. There's a black fatigue in general that's out there, that it's like, this has gone on for so long. We are always thankful and grateful for opportunity. We're always thankful and grateful to be seen and not be invisible, meaning there's now space for us to put some of our artistic endeavors in place. But there's a fatigue, and the fatigue is, we will always have that struggle. So where does that struggle end? Where's the accountability for that to just end and for it just to be normal representation?
Right. Is it a generational change that we can look forward to? The second part of my question was about the production crews that you work with that aren't from Canada, that come up north, and what perspective do you think you get from working with them in terms of, is it colorblind casting for them, or are they, as Darrell was saying, which is what Darrell was kind of reflecting on, or is it more about, no, we need someone who is of this ethnicity or this background?
I think it's half and half. I don't think it's one way or the other completely. I think we're still getting a little bit of both, where there is a mandate and it needs to be filled. You should have a woman in that role. I love auditioning for roles that are not just black, white, green, or in between. I love going for a lawyer that was written originally as a male.
Right.
And then isn't that terrific that I can bring my spin to it because now I'm a woman of color. So I can bring that into it. In terms of speaking with producers directly, a lot of them are always happy to have the opportunity to work with me again, which is great. Whether they feel personally, I only know what I get on the outside. What I don't know is on the inside, whether they would have skewed it and had it go another direction. I only have to take what has been given to me, face value. So this conversation kind of has an in front of and a kind of behind the scene.
Right.
Everybody. We only wish to go so far because the truth of where we are, because of all that has happened, the inequities, inequalities, the racism, the discrimination, the stereotypes, it's an ugly conversation. And some are being pushed in that direction to make that change, and some are being, are jumping in with both feet, and some are reluctantly going, oh, well, whatever. So, and it's felt on many different levels. So in order to effect change, I have a few thoughts on that, but I'll stop for the moment because I don't want to get ahead of where you may be.
Well, that'll probably fit more into the last sort of topic that we want to get into, is where we're going. Since we're talking about where we are, and Prem, before I get you to define wins and successes, let's take a look at a video promoting a campaign from the TBS, TNT, and True TV networks. It sends a very, very clear message around the concept of more. Here, everybody take a look at this.
For too long, more has been reserved for the few, which is why we're starting at more.
More joy.
More representation.
More soul. I can remember early in my career thinking, where are the other stories?
More directors. More leading actors.
More showrunners.
More producers.
More leaders.
You see organizations respond to things that are happening in society as opposed to being proactive.
More empowerment.
More equality.
More humanity.
More character.
More women.
More opportunity.
More voices.
More from us.
More for you.
What do we need more of?
Us.
Well, there you go. Prem, if you want to just kind of pick it up from there, this is just, as I mentioned, a concept where, and a campaign that those networks, TBS, TNT, and True TV networks have been pushing forward. And I love the maxim of, for far too long, more has been reserved for the few. More from us, more for you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, it's a really great and interesting video. And it really, you know, something that my colleagues and I talk a lot about is actually moving from, we're in a space now, moving from the performative to the actions and then the accountability around it. Because you can, you know, talk about things and how important equity is. And I do genuinely believe that for most, that is coming from a very authentic place. They want to make change. But the proof at the end of the day is in, well, what are the actions and what are the actual clear tactics that people are taking, whether you're an individual or an organization or the industry itself. And it has to happen on all levels at the same time. And it's going to take time. And it's going to be a bumpy, uncomfortable journey for many. And that's something, again, that I talk a lot about as well. Many things have to happen in parallel. And if they're not happening, it's really going to be difficult for one person or one group just to continue the work along, to actually see the shifts and changes. And, you know, what we're seeing certainly, you know, on the ground here in BC is that there are a lot of things starting to happen around taking those actions. But, you know, if we don't actually continue to talk about it again at all levels, what I liked about that video is that they kind of talked about everything from leadership to the performers, to the executives, to the marketing people, and that's where all of the changes have to happen. Because I think particularly, you know, Indigenous, Black, racialized people, you've kind of had this much of the pie that we're all fighting over in some sense, because the other piece has still been, you know, either inaccessible or just controlled by the same type of people. And it's not to say we need to make a wholesale change in leadership, but there has to be some kind of, this is what we're talking about here today, is equity. And how do we get to that kind of equity in all of those places, to see all of the people who might be, you know, especially working in the visual effects and animation world, which a lot of the audience here might be today, is that, you know, they're dealing with something completely different than physical production. And it's really dependent on the writers and the, you know, the studio executives and the people who are leading those types of projects or creating characters in such a different way. And I think, Brenda, I know you've done voice work, maybe you have as well, Darrell, but I think also, you know, even the fact that people are now saying, oh, maybe a Black animated character should be voiced by a Black actor. Like, yeah, it should be, you know, so I think that's where we are now in that sense of where we're starting to see. I feel that for all these, you know, decades of conversation that I've been having around this, there is a change and it's very positive, but it's going to have to be consistent. And that's what where all the work is going to come in.
Can I jump in there for a sec? Okay, just going to say, I'm coming from a place of respect, so please hear me out when I say this. I'm going to jump on some of what Darrell said, which was owning some of your own material and writing some of your own material and finding that space for that. When I look at the whole industry, when I look at the world, like where we are, this is purely my thoughts. This is from a philosophical perspective. I look at it as an approach. I look at it as a top up, a top down, I should say, or a bottom up. So when I get what you're saying, Prem, that you see change and a shift coming. We all see a change and a shift coming. But if we're going to have that kind of conversation, then I have to look at what is the makeup from the top out. Who sits on that panel? And who makes those policies? Who is it made up of? Is it the old guard? Is there a token or two? Is it a complete Black board, a BIPOC board panel? Is it mostly predominantly male? There's money involved. There's funding involved, which will affect a positive spin on what is going to be shown in terms of the quality and content. So that's sort of the top-down approach, but it is also steeped with stereotypes. It's steeped with discrimination and bigotry and racism. And even though there's a certain level of education that comes there, there's a certain level of ignorance as well. From the bottom up, you're looking at our youth. You're looking at education. Not everybody's given the same opportunity, the same funding, the same ability to participate. So you can give someone all the clothes, but you don't give them any boots. They've got nothing to walk in. They cannot participate in the same way. So what is influencing education, which I think is a big proponent, what is missing in terms of our youth and perpetuating this ongoing cycle, is you need to know your history. There are so many of us that come from different walks and all come together in Canada, not just the American history, which includes slavery, includes civil rights, includes, excuse me, I was choking, includes civil rights, includes affirmative action, and has taken us to what is working, what is not working, what is still perpetuating to this day, because it is one thing that affects everybody else. So while our stories or our origins might not be, say, the Black American story, it still adversely affects each and every one of us. We all have our own, whether you're a Canadian Black, African Black, West Indian Black, First Nations. So what do we all do to get around that and continue on a positive spin? We start our own production companies. We become the Tyler Perrys. We become the Oprah Winfreys. We write, we direct, we produce. We own our content. We distribute our content. We get our message out. So we get around the old guard. We get around that fatigue and we get energized and find that space for it. But it's still something that we'll never give up on, because we have that inherent hope that things will eventually change. We won't have to work so hard.
Darrell, did you want to jump in as well? Because what I wanted to also just put out to the group at large is ask about your markers for success going forward. And just before you answer that, I also want to invite the attendees that if you want to add questions to the list to ask our panelists, then feel free to do so. So go ahead, Darrell. What do you think in terms of where we're headed?
No, I mean, I agree with what they've both said. I mean, absolutely, there has been a monumental shift in the industry, as I've seen it over the years, as far as people, you know, starting to move forward and starting to get more diversity in their rooms, you know, in their boardrooms. It's, you know, it's slow moving and it's still a long way to go. But I completely agree. I mean, that's one of the things that I've been working with lately is becoming. Trying, not so much worrying about who the gatekeepers are, but becoming the gatekeepers, you know. And I think one of the great ways, you know, one of the surefire ways of doing that is creating content that, you know, people actually want to watch, you know. So as opposed to, see, there's a huge problem with my community in that a lot of what we are expected to present as far as our story has been what we call poverty porn, you know. I mean, a lot of times, for the majority part, they will only want to see something Indigenous if there is residential school, if there's, you know, abuse, if there's violence in it. And a lot of what I've been working on is the comedy side of it, the entertainment side. And I think the more that people can go to a particular, community and see shows that entertain them as well, then that's how we start to go, oh, wait, these are profitable. That's when networks will go, oh, hey, what are you guys working on? Because, the stuff that you do, people are watching and are really entertained by. And really, when it comes down to it, it's the entertainment industry. I mean, there's room for, those important stories. And we all, coming from diverse backgrounds, we are expected to tell those important stories. But we also have the entertaining stories. We have our Rocky stories. We have our Star Warses that we want to get out, and those are the ones that I think that's the new push that we gotta really try to do and absolutely become the gatekeepers. And that's really what I'm focused on myself, is becoming the person in power, so that I don't have to, as you say, Brenda, educate them about my people as much, do the work so that, it's there, and you don't have to waste your time spinning your wheels trying to educate people.
Well, and I'm jumping in, I apologize, but I just want to ride on something that you said, Darrell, and that's education, right? So that you are articulate, you are able to express yourself, you're able to bring forth that which is important to you, which is a story about you. It's got not necessarily anything necessarily to do with whether you're black, white, green, or in between. It is a story about people in real life living situations. It is not the stereotypical story that, okay, I am Indian, I am whatever, or, can you be more black? Can you give me, I told a director off at one point for that very reason, because it was like, why can't this character just be who she is without putting that spin on it to be more black? There's a trip all over that, but I digress. So I do believe it is about being articulate, being focused, having that edge, having that will and that passion to go there and tell your stories, because this is something that, as Prem was saying, it's going to take a little bit longer of a shift to bring that top down story and that bottom up, bring these together to go forward, so we can transcend and go forward and onward and higher.
And that's probably a great segue to talking about what Creative BC is doing, Prem, with the JEDI program.
Yeah, sure. There's a few things happening, I think, in Canada in general right now. In the last 18 months, and this was, sadly triggered really a lot of the work, I think, globally across many industries, or with the murder of George Floyd. And it really, that was the tipping point during a global pandemic that really started to push towards initiatives and actions that many people have been talking about for a long time. So we now have an Indigenous Screen Office that is, has their own sovereignty in looking at what types of projects are getting funded. We're going to see an amazing dearth of content coming specifically from Indigenous filmmakers, I believe, in the next, 2 to 3 years, because a lot is in development right now, and I've seen some of it, and it's of all genres, right? So not just the trauma genre, which is also very important, right? Those stories were never told, and we need those stories told as well. But to your point, Darrell, there's a cross section. There's also the Black Screen Office that, again, is a national initiative looking at supporting Black and racialized filmmakers and artists. So there's many of these things happening. A lot of the work that we've been focused on, we actually did a study a few years ago looking at the labor market, specifically the below the line workforce. Similar work has been done on the creative tech, visual effects, and animation side in BC, where we're looking at what are our labor market needs. Everybody knows BC's up north, very busy here, but we actually have a large group of people who are retiring or leaving the industry in the next few years. And while we weren't doing a demographic study, we learned, to nobody's surprise, that the industry was not very diverse or representative of our actual population of people, and generally tends to be a very closed industry and not easy to network or learn how to get in. Because part of, I think, what Brenda's speaking to is people don't even know where to start. To, how do I, even if I want to be, whether I'm a performer or I want to just, become a PA to start to learn the tricks of the trade, or how to enter. So we became really focused on looking at what we're calling JEDI, and a lot of people are using this acronym, which is Justice, Equity, Diversity. We've added another D, Decolonization and Inclusion. And what does that really mean, and how do we look at it across all aspects, from what do individuals need to do or think about, what do organizations need to think about, and what does the industry need to think about, or what are the specific tools across that, from approaching things with that intersectional lens. So, Brenda, in your case, your children are mixed race. You know, there's gender, there's actual economic, you know, positions that people come from. I think we're getting a countdown, so I'm going to stop. But the one project, so that others can chime in here, but the one project that we've launched and will build out through and going into the new year is called Creative Pathways. You can just Google it, you'll find the website. And it is really trying to create a platform, a website where people can understand how to enter the industry, what kind of education they need or don't, but what are those pathways into a career, but also how do they find community and how do we build networks, especially in this world that we continue to seem to live in, because so much of this industry is about who you know. And you know, you worked on this film and people are going to recommend you for this next project. So an opportunity to try to build that story. And the work that we is doing by virtue of having this type of session and platform, and they've done this type of, it's not the first time they're having these conversations. So more people having the conversations on an ongoing basis, and there is a lot happening across the country, but you know, more has to happen and more to come.
CreativePathwaysCanada.com. Once again, CreativePathwaysCanada.com. Please check out that website, and I just did recently, and it's a very good resource to check out. A question from one of our attendees to either Darrell or Brenda or Prem. What organizations, studios in the industry have you seen wholeheartedly helping BIPOC to own their own content?
Yeah, I mean, that is I mean, Darrell and Brenda probably have more direct experience with the studios. I mean, there's a lot of studios, Warner Brothers, Netflix, that have really strong inclusion policies and equity statements they've put out, and plans, detailed plans. The ownership of the content is you know, probably a whole other panel on how that system is working. But Darrell, you're probably doing this stuff right now.
Yeah, that is the unfortunate thing, is that there is so much money involved that you know, complete ownership of a project, especially when you're first starting out, usually doesn't happen unless you're at the stage of being, you know, so let's just think of diverse people like a Tyler Perry or a Shonda Rhimes or something like that, who have the power, who have proven themselves that they can have complete control over their project. But yeah, if you're starting out, like the amount of money and the amount, it is a business. It's a corporate business. The entertainment industry, it's $1 billion corporate industry. So that is the thing. It's like we often like to think of it in terms of the artistic nature of it, and that is an aspect. But at the end of the day, the bigger aspect of it is the money. And unfortunately, it comes down to that a lot. And if your art can make money, then you will be a successful artist. It's a kind of a dichotomy, you know. But it's pretty tough. But yeah, Netflix, you're right, is pretty good at that sort of thing.
Yeah, I think that question deserves a little more time, a little more research to adequately answer it. I can't think of anything just at the moment off the top, so I'd like to just put a little peg on that, if I may, and if we should be so lucky as to get together again and have another discussion on it. But I do want to ride on the heels of something that was mentioned, which is, besides the education component, it's the mentorship. I think Prem sort of touched on that from on a corporate level, but down on the ground level, right from school, we need those models, we need those role models in the school. So whether it's a teacher that, you know, lifts up a student, and somewhere within our own industry where we provide those opportunities for people to come in who don't know anything about the business and shadow. I know I I've started programs where I've had where money was not a factor, did not have to be a inhibiting factor. And I championed youth to come in and take 6 weeks, 8 weeks of an acting class, and then go out and meet and greet with industry professionals or have them come to the studio. So I think championing our youth and mentorship is right there on the heels of making sure you're very fully aware of not just what goes on in front of or behind the camera, but business aspects, so that down the road, you are educated to look at how you can work with that mentor who's maybe like a Tyler Perry by sending them a note and learning how you can get to that point to own your stuff, distribute your stuff.
Sounds great. Thank you, Brenda, for that. Thank you to Darrell and Prem for their incredible insight, not only sharing their experiences, but also talking about where we are today and where we're headed. And I would like to thank Spark Animation and of course the WIA and the very hardworking volunteers who made this panel possible. Thank you to all of you.
Thanks, Aamer.
Thank you. Thank
Thank
you.
you so much. Thank you for having me.
Thank you.